The next three pillars, and to kick that off, we want to talk about the third pillar of the roadmap, which is about redirecting private capital away from nature-damaging activities and towards ones that support a nature-positive transition. When it comes to private capital for the nature-positive transition, a lot of the discussion and progress here has been on how to mobilize private capital for direct investments in nature and a general need to develop innovative financing mechanisms. So this is important, especially for the nature-rich countries that aren't receiving enough capital to prioritize nature. And for those countries, we should also consider approaches like taxation, natural resource levies, and international transfer mechanisms. But we also need the focus to be broader than direct investments in nature, as we show in the roadmap. And so by this, we mean investing in areas like nature-friendly technologies and modes of production, such as ones that are driving more circular and efficient resource use. And to do this, we need reforms in the systemic conditions that shape the flows of private capital, so that we're disincentivizing nature-degrading activities like deforestation and incentivizing investments in the nature-positive transition. So this is going to take much stronger economic policies at the national level, as well as changes to global financial regulatory frameworks, both of which are currently lacking when it comes to nature, especially compared to climate. Policymaking and regulation is going to be crucial here, because voluntary redirection of finance cannot by itself reverse biodiversity loss. So what private capital needs is stronger signals and requirements about where to direct their investments. The Network for Greening the Financial System has made a lot of positive strides in this area, especially in terms of recognizing the role that central banks and financial regulators play in facilitating financial sector alignment with the global biodiversity framework and recognizing the extreme risks that nature loss poses to human well-being and economic activity. But as we show in the roadmap, there's still a lot to be done in this area. So I want to move on to the next pillar. The fourth pillar here is about international financial institutions and development finance. So here we recognize that these institutions play a crucial role when it comes to setting global financial norms and standards, influencing national policies, and funding and shaping large-scale development strategies. Fundamentally, these institutions need to adapt their mandates, strategies, and decision-making to more explicitly address nature-related risks and impacts, as they have in many cases already done for climate-related risks. This is also going to require a review of their governance and decision-making processes to better empower and support nature-rich developing countries that may not be equitably represented by international financial institutions. Development financing institutions also have a really important role to play in channeling resources from developed countries to the developing countries that have limited access to private capital, especially in nature-rich countries. Rather than simply de-risking private capital, development financing institutions need to become first movers on the investments that are needed to support the nature-positive transition and implement sustainable development pathways that don't rely on unsustainable extraction. So as far as possible, development financing needs to be provided alongside technical assistance and shouldn't exacerbate the debt burden in developing countries. So the debt point is especially important here, and while there's a lot of progress and that this is recognized by international financial institutions, developing countries are facing an urgent and worsening debt crisis that's undermining their fiscal space to invest in the nature-positive transition. Acute debt distress has been known to drive countries to prioritize exploitation of nature and short-term economic gain, and as creditors to many countries, development financing institutions have an essential role to play in addressing debt relief and restructuring, but currently there are major gaps in making explicit links between this and the biodiversity loss crisis. Finally, under Pillar 5, we're focusing on trade policies and governance of the global commons. And this is about preventing the displacement of environmental harm and addressing the spillover nature impacts associated with global supply chains. Trade rules and agreements can inadvertently penalize countries that adopt higher environmental standards or otherwise lead to a race to the bottom where trading states sacrifice environmental or worker safety standards to undercut competing prices. So here, we see a need to more generally make progress in recalibrating trade policies to support, incentivize, and reward higher environmental standards, including to better reward environmental stewards for their sustainable management of nature. But we also recognize that this has to be taken sensitively and equitably to support a just transition. So in other words, negative transitional impacts have to be assessed and managed, such as through support to communities that are affected during the transition, including support in developing alternative livelihoods. Trade is also a major channel for international technological transfer. So here we see a major role that's still missing for building capacity for and promoting technological development and diffusion to bolster nature-friendly methods of production. And finally, this pillar also discusses the governance of the global commons, since environmental stressors that are transmitted through trade can often undermine the global commons. And though there have been several conventions to govern the global commons, there's still significant gaps that have to be filled so that we can build an integrated governance framework that harmonizes regulations, prevents resource overexploitation, and mitigates potential cross-border environmental impacts. So with that fifth and final pillar, I just want to pass back to Karen so that she can talk about what's next for the roadmap. Thanks so much.
That's great.